Should you keep going even though it might be dangerous? Yes, to win. We've always done that, you know. It's never been about the money. We raced even though we didn't have any. He was known as the Intimidator for a reason. The late Dale Earnhardt Sr. was more than just a driver. He won 76 races, won millions of dollars in prizes, and left his mark on the Daytona dirt. As a Southern Motorsports royalty, he stood for bold control and unbreakable grit. All of that came to an end in one shocking moment on February 18, 2001. A crash in the last lap that looked like just another bump turned out to be the one that killed a star and shook NASCAR to its core. What happened next broke my heart. What really happened on the last lap at Daytona? He had been here before. The crowd roars the same way every time, same tight turns at very fast speeds. For Dale Earnhardt, Daytona was his church. He knew every part of it, including the long straights and steep hills. He had won it, bled on it, and put medals above the finish line. However, he wasn't in first place in the race that February afternoon. He was busy with something just as important. He was watching out for it. On the very last lap of the 2001 Daytona 500, Dale Earnhardt Sr. was keeping the pack back. There was a fight for the win between his son Dale Earnhardt Jr. and his driver Michael Waltrip. Behind them, Dale Sr. was stopping, sliding, and protecting the inside line with his car like a bodyguard. It was a planned and thought-out move. He was no longer just racing for himself. He was captain of his team in a fast-paced game of chess where one mistake could mean disaster. Then it took place. Sterling Marlin's car got into Earnhardt's rear quarter panel as they went into turn 4, with the finish flag just around the corner. It was not rough. It was the kind of impact that goes on a lot during races, but at 150 miles per hour, even a small push can kill. Earnhardt's car went down a little, then snapped up and against the wall. Ken Schrader's car pulled up next to him. When the two cars hit each other, Dale's number 3 Chevrolet hit the outside barrier head-on. Things didn't look terrible. Not at first. The car ran into the wall and stopped. There was no fire, no exciting spin, and no parts going off. There was a crash. Not anything that would make fans in the stands gasp in shock, though. In fact, it looked like it could be survived. Dale had walked away from this kind of mess 100 times before, but this time was different. The first person to get in touch with him was Ken Schrader. He got out of the wrecked car he was in and ran to the driver's side of the third car. He quickly turned away after seeing what he did. His face changed. His posture got worse. He told reporters afterward that he wouldn't talk about what he saw. His reason wasn't to protect Dale, but because he knew he was about to die. The medical teams got there quickly. He was taken to Halifax Medical Center after being pulled from the wreckage. The world was ready. Fans didn't say anything. The pit workers stopped moving. Radio and TV hosts, who usually talk a lot when a race is over, spoke quietly. NASCAR had just changed in a way that would never go back. On May 16 at 5:16 p.m., doctors confirmed what many people already thought. Dale Earnhardt Sr. was killed quickly by the crash. The man who seemed impossible to beat and whose image was built on scariness and bravery was gone. However, how could a crash that looked so minor kill the most skilled driver on the track? That's what the autopsy would show, and what it showed shocked fans. The autopsy report from the Volusia County Medical Examiner showed that Earnhardt died from a bacillus fracture in the skull. A severe break at the base of the head, usually near the brainstem, is what this kind of break looks like. This is one of the most dangerous types of head injuries, and it's usually caused by quick, violent slowing down. That's what happened when Earnhardt's car hit the wall at high speed. Even though the crash only lasted seconds, the forces that were at work were huge. The break was called a ring fracture that went around the base of the head. When this kind of damage happens, the brain stops working right away. We can say that Dale Earnhardt died when his head violently snapped back after being thrown forward during the crash. It was quick, quiet, and over. It wasn't painful or aware. It was just sudden, unbreakable silence. The autopsy also showed that the person had been hit in the chest. Their lungs were broken, their left ankle was broken, and they had abrasions from the seatbelt. In the moments after the accident, reports quickly spread that the seatbelt had broken. Some people thought it might have been changed before the race. Others thought it had torn when it hit something. but medical staff and team members said those reports were not true. Tommy Probst, a rescue worker who tried to save Earnhardt's life, said in public that the seatbelt was still in place when he got to the scene of the accident. No matter what, the outcome was the same. Just the blow to the head was enough to kill him. The lack of a device to support the head and neck, the hands device, was very important. At the time, NASCAR did not require drivers to wear the device, and Earnhardt refused to do so because he thought it made it harder for him to move around. Other drivers agreed with him. That changed in an instant. A study within NASCAR began almost right away. Within days, the organization was looking at crash video, car parts, and talking to doctors to figure out how one of the sport's biggest legends had died in a crash that seemed like it could have been avoided. What they found was very bad. The cars were not flexible enough. The walls were too strong. It was time to replace the safety gear. It was a harsh wake-up for a sport that had spent decades focusing on speed and showmanship. One sad thing became clear when Earnhardt died. It had to get better. It did happen. Within the year, new safety rules were put in place. The Hans method had to be used. The inside of cars was changed to better absorb energy. Crash walls were remade with barriers that were safer. Panels made of steel and foam that absorbed kinetic force and lessened blunt contact trauma. The cockpits were made stronger. Helmets got better. Even the seats were changed to make them safer for the driver's head and back. Dale Earnhardt's death was more than just the end of an era. It was the start of a change. Even though he was gone, every driver who has survived a crash since then owes something to the memory he left behind. Not only on the track, but also in a report that changed the rules. As word spread that he had died, honors came in from all over the world. At Daytona, fans cried out loud. People in the race wore black armbands. His famous number 3 car became a sign of respect and loss. No longer were there any worries about how tough he was or how committed he was. That's what the person who said he'd rather die in a race car than go away quietly did. In the process, he left a plan that could have saved hundreds of lives since then. But the people who were there that day, especially his son Dale Earnhardt Jr., were in a lot of pain. It was about them. In front of you, your father died at 200 miles per hour. You will never forget that. For Junior, the sadness turned into drive. He carried the Earnhardt name into a new age of racing. He won races, became the most popular driver every year, and fought for safer racing conditions along the way. There's something scary about how Dale Earnhardt died. Not because it was exciting, but because it was calm, out of the blue, almost impossible for the untrained eye to see. Don't smoke, not any fires. He was just a man who had been through everything the sport could throw at him. Undone by a single very strong event in fate and physics, and maybe that's why everyone remembers it so well. Because anyone can have what happened to him. How one death changed an entire sport. When it was revealed that Dale Earnhardt Sr. had died, NASCAR culture changed. It wasn't just sadness, it was time to count. The sport had been on a very fine line for decades. Between being an exciting show and putting people's lives in danger, accidents were going to happen. While crashes were fun, the death of the Intimidator was a different story. It wasn't just the death of a hero, it was a call to action. Within hours, NASCAR officials started a full probe within the company. Every shot of the race video was watched again. All of Earnhardt's number 3 Chevrolet's technical parts were looked at. Medical papers, car telemetry, and even pieces of seat belts were looked at closely. There were no rules, There were no rules. More and more people were realizing that something basic was wrong if Earnhardt could die in what looked like a moderate crash. Something had to be fixed. What they found made them feel bad. The cars had changed over time to get faster, stronger, and better at cutting through air. They made it more likely that they would crash, though. The stiffness that let a car fly through the air also made it give the driver more force when it hit something. It felt like being inside a steel and fiberglass rocket. There were also the concrete walls that were everywhere and didn't give in. All of the force that a driver hit them was mirrored back into them. The Daytona track was made for speed, not for staying alive. Earnhardt hit the outside wall of turn 4 at an angle that sent all of his kinetic energy straight into the cabin. That energy had nowhere to go, and it killed everyone. The answer came right away. NASCAR set up the Research and Development Center. a building whose only goal was to make drivers safer. Biomechanical engineers, trauma doctors, and crash experts were brought in to help them. Injuries in racing could no longer be seen as just a bad side effect. Prevention had to become very important. The first big step forward was in restraint methods. After a few months, the Hans device was no longer a possibility. This head and neck support system held the driver's helmet in place on the shoulders, which stopped Earnhardt from getting the fatal whiplash that broke his brain. The very action that killed him would now be physically impossible for drivers who wear the device in the future. After that came the safer wall. Instead of plain concrete walls, the steel and foam energy reduction system used stacked materials that took in and spread out energy. These barriers, which were made by engineers at the University of Nebraska, worked like shock absorbers and cut crash forces by as much as 70%. They were first put up at Indianapolis, and then they quickly spread to all of NASCAR big tracks. The cars themselves went through big changes. When it came out in 2007, the car of the future had a wider frame, a stronger roof, and materials in the cabin that would absorb impact. The driver was moved farther away from the door to lower the risk of injury from a side accident. The roof flaps were changed. The roll bars were made better. Every part of the car was rethought with one question in mind: how can we make sure that the next Dale Earnhardt doesn't die? People had a range of reactions. Fans of the sport for a long time were afraid that it would become too controlled, too clean, and too slow. Some people even said that NASCAR was using Earnhardt's death to get away with marketing redesigns. But most people knew what was at stake. It couldn't have been for nothing that one of the best drivers of all time died. The sport should have learned something from Dale Earnhardt's death. Some drivers didn't want to make the changes at first, but they did. A lot of people didn't want the Hans gadget because they said it was uncomfortable or limiting. But pushback went away when people saw what happened that February afternoon. Everyone didn't want to be the next autopsy report. Engineers, crew chiefs, and even pit workers started to train in new ways. It became normal to do safety drills. Simulations of crashes were looked at in great depth. It was no longer possible to fly by feeling. He was now king of data. Earnhardt was everywhere, even though he wasn't there. His face stayed on the goods. His name was used to honor him. His third number became holy. But more than that, his death set the standard for all decisions made after that about safety. Every new helmet changed rule, and lowered barrier carried a piece of his heritage. Something very strange happened in the years that followed. The number of deaths in NASCAR dropped to 0. Since that day in 2001, no driver has died in a big NASCAR event. There have been terrible crashes, flips through the air, and cars that burned to the ground after splitting in half, but the drivers were still alive, if hurt or scared. And every time someone brings up Dale, fans still don't start with the rules book when they talk about the safety of NASCAR today. They only have one name to begin with, one number,